is not just fought on battlefields. It reshapes economies, borders, cultures, technology, psychology, and the future of humanity. When the United States goes to war, the entire world feels it. This documentary answers one question. How does war change the world even for people far from the battlefield? War and global power shift. 1.1 How wars create superpowers. World War I Fall of European empires. World War II Rise of the United States and Soviet Union. Cold War Bipolar World Order. USA impact. Dollar becomes global reserve currency. US military bases spread worldwide. America becomes global security guarantor. 1 to collapse of empires. British Empire after WW2. Ottoman Empire after WW1. Soviet Union after Cold War conflicts. Key message. Wars don't just decide winners, they erase entire civilizations. Economic impact of war. 2.1 Global economy during war. Stock markets react instantly. Oil prices spike. Supply chains collapse. 2 to war profits and military industrial complex. Defense contractors Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing. US defense budget influence. Eisenhower's warning. 2.3 Who pays the real cost? Taxpayers. Inflation. Developing nations suffer most. American wars often stabilize some economies while destroying others permanently. War and technology. 3.1 War accelerates innovation. Radar, internet, GPS, nuclear power, space race. 3.2 Modern warfare. Drones. Targeting. Cyber warfare. Space militarization. 3.3 The ethical dilemma. Just because we can build it, should we use it? America leads military tech but also sets dangerous global precedents. War and human cost. 4.1 Civilian casualties. Modern wars kill more civilians than soldiers. Women and children most affected. 4.2 Refugee crisis. Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Gaza. 4.3 Veterans and trauma. PTSD. Suicide crisis. Homeless veterans USA issue. War never ends when fighting stops. War and politics. 5.1 War is political tool. Regime change. Proxy wars. Sanctions as economic warfare. 5.2 Democracy versus security. Patriot Act. Surveillance. Civil liberties reduction. 5.3 Media and propaganda. Manufacturing consent. War narratives. Fake news and psypos. USA reality. War reshapes American politics for generations. War as a political tool. War is not only about defeating enemies. It is about shaping the world in a way that serves political interests. War as strategy, not accident. In American history, wars are often explained as necessary, defensive, for freedom, to protect democracy. But behind every war lies political calculation. Who gains power? Who loses influence? Who controls resources? Who controls narratives? Regime change exporting power. What is regime change? Regime change is the removal or replacement of a foreign government, often justified as removing dictators, fighting terrorism, spreading democracy. But in practice, regime change often serves strategic interests. USA examples. Iran 1953. Democratically elected prime minister overthrown. Reason nationalized oil. Result decades of instability, anti-American sentiment. Iraq 2003. Justification weapons of mass destruction. Reality no one's found. Result collapse of Iraqi state. Rise of ISIS. Regional chaos. Long-term instability. Libya 2011. NATO intervention. Gaddafi removed. Result: failed state, civil war, slave markets, terrorist safe havens. Political reality. Regime change rarely creates democracy. It usually creates power vacuums, civil wars, radicalization, long-term hatred toward the US, political impact on America, endless wars, global backlash, loss of moral authority, war fatigue among voters. Proxy war is fighting without fighting. What is a proxy war? A proxy war occurs when powerful nations fight indirectly using local militias, rebel groups, other nations' armies. This allows political influence without direct accountability. Cold War playbook: USA versus Soviet Union, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. Millions died without direct superpower battles. Modern proxy wars: Ukraine war, Ukraine fights, Russia attacks, USA and NATO fund, arm, and influence. Middle East, Iran-backed groups, US-backed governments. Why politicians love proxy wars: fewer soldiers die, less public backlash, no formal declaration of war, political flexibility. Reality: proxy wars turn entire nations into battlefields for global politics. Sanctions as economic warfare. War doesn't always use bombs. Sometimes it uses banks, trade, and currencies. What are sanctions? Sanctions are trade restrictions, financial blockades, currency controls. They are often described as peaceful alternatives to war. Reality of sanctions. Sanctions destroy economies, cause inflation, create shortages of food and medicine, hurt civilians far more than leaders. Examples: Iran, crippled economy, medical shortages, radicalization. Russia, energy shocks, global food inflation, strengthening of alternative alliances. Political effect: sanctions often entrench regimes, not remove them. 5 point to democracy versus security. Every war creates fear, and fear is the most powerful political tool of all. The Patriot tacked security at a cost. After 9/11, America was traumatized. Politicians promised never again. The result: the Patriot Act expanded surveillance powers, reduced privacy protections. What changed? Government could monitor phone calls, track emails, access financial records, detain suspects without trial, all in the name of national security. The question: can democracy survive if fear justifies unlimited power? Mass surveillance state. What war normalized? NSA data collection, facial recognition, airport body scanners, internet monitoring. Revelations by Edward Snowden showed Americans were being watched, not just enemies, not just suspects. Political impact: war permanently shifted the balance from freedom to control. Civil liberties reduction. During war, protesters are labeled unpatriotic, whistleblowers are punished, journalists are monitored. War and culture. 6.1 movies, games, and war glorification. Hollywood. Call of Duty. American hero myth. 6 point to music and literature. Protest songs. War poetry. Trauma storytelling. 6.3 national identity. War defines how nations see themselves. Movies, games, and war glorification. Hollywood, the war machine you don't see. Hollywood is one of the most powerful storytellers in human history. From World War II films to modern military blockbusters, American cinema has shaped how the world sees war and how Americans understand themselves. We and the Good War. World War II is often called America's moral war. Movies like Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, The Longest Day portray clear heroes, clear villains, sacrifice as noble, death as meaningful. These films didn't just entertain, they cemented the idea that American wars are fought for freedom. Vietnam, the first cultural shock. Vietnam changed everything? Films like Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket showed confusion, psychological breakdown, moral ambiguity. For the first time, Hollywood showed that war can be pointless, cruel, and mentally destructive. This wasn't just cinema, it was a national trauma being processed on screen. Modern war films, post 9/11 movies like American Sniper, Lone Survivor, Black Hawk Down, shift focus again. Soldier as individual hero, emotional sacrifice, brotherhood under fire, politics fade into the background. The soldier becomes the story. Video games, war as entertainment. No medium has normalized war like video games. Call of Duty and military fantasy. Call of Duty doesn't show war, it lets you play it. You are the elite soldier, the last line of defense, the hero who saves the world. Death has no weight. Civilian suffering is invisible. Consequences reset after every mission. Psychological impact. For millions of young Americans, their first experience of war is digital. War feels fast, clean, heroic. Critics argue this desensitizes as violence, blurs reality and fantasy, makes war feel inevitable and exciting. The US military has even collaborated with game developers not as propaganda, but a soft influence. The American hero myth. At the center of all this is one powerful idea. One brave American can change the course of history. This myth appears everywhere. The lone sniper, the fearless pilot, the last soldier standing. It simplifies war into courage versus evil, action versus doubt. But real wars are bureaucratic, political, chaotic, often morally unclear. The hero myth doesn't lie, it selects what it shows. 6 to music and literature. War speaks when guns stop. When wars end, culture begins to ask, was it worth it? Protest songs, the voice of resistance. America has a long tradition of war protests through music. Vietnam era songs like Fortunate Son, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Blowing in the Wind, Bob Dylan, Give Peace a Chance, John Lennon. These songs challenge political lies, class inequality in the draft, endless fighting. Music became organized resistance. Modern era. Post 9/11 protest music questioned endless wars, civilian deaths, government secrecy. Music allowed people to criticize war without weapons. War poetry, the human cost. Poetry removes politics and leaves pain. From World War I to Afghanistan, poets write about fear, guilt, loss, survivor's shame. Unlike movies, poetry doesn't glorify, it confesses. War poetry reminds us the body survives, the mind often doesn't. Trauma storytelling. Modern war literature focuses on PTSD, moral injury, reintegration into society. Books and memoirs by veterans show war doesn't end at homecoming. Civilians and soldiers live in different worlds. These stories challenge the hero myth not by denying courage, but by revealing the cost of it. 6.3 National identity. War defines who we think we are. Every nation tells itself a story about war. America freedom through force. The United States was born in war. Revolution is the foundation myth. American identity includes resistance to tyranny, armed defense of freedom, global alliances and enemies, 7.1 NATO and collective defense. Why NATO exists. Why USA funds it. 7.2 enemies created by war. Al-Qaeda. Taliban resurgence. 7.3 rise of new powers. China. Russia. Iran. Multipolar world. NATO and collective defense. Why NATO exists. To understand NATO, we must go back to 1945. World War II had just ended. Europe was destroyed. Millions were dead. Cities were rubble. But one fear dominated Western leaders' minds. Another world war could happen in this time. It could be nuclear. The Soviet threat. After the United States emerged as a superpower. The Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe. Two ideologies clashed. Capitalist democracy USA. Communist authoritarianism USSR. Western Europe feared invasion. The USA feared communism spreading without resistance. So in 1949, NATO was born. What NATO really is? NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But its core promise is one sentence, Article 5. An attack on one member is an attack on all. This meant if the Soviet Union attacked France, the USA would respond militarily, even if America itself was not attacked. This was revolutionary. For the first time in history, the USA committed to permanent military protection of foreign nations. Why the USA funds NATO? This question dominates American politics. Why does America pay for Europe's defense? The number's reality. USA contributes around 70% of NATO's total military power. Many NATO countries spend less than the required 2% of GDP. American taxpayers fund bases, weapons, logistics, and nuclear deterrence. So why does the USA accept this burden? Strategic reasons, not charity. Forward defense. US bases in Europe stop wars before they reach America. It's cheaper to prevent war than fight it at home. Global influence. NATO gives the USA political leverage over Europe. Allies often align with us foreign policy. Economic power. Stability protects global trade. Dollar dominance depends on global security. Deterrence. NATO discourages Russia from attacking Europe. One miscalculation could mean World War E. NATO after the Cold War. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many asked, why does NATO still exist? But NATO didn't disappear, it expanded. Poland, Baltic states, Eastern Europe. To the USA and NATO, expansion meant security. To Russia, expansion meant encirclement. And this tension planted the seeds for future wars, especially Ukraine. 7 enemies created by war. Wars don't just destroy enemies, they create new ones. Some of America's most dangerous enemies were indirect products of us wars. Al-Qaeda born from Cold War strategy. Afghanistan, 1980s? In the 1980s, Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. USA saw an opportunity to weaken its rival. The CIA funded and armed Islamic fighters known as the Mujahideen. Among them was a wealthy Saudi named Osama bin Laden. The mistake. The USA achieved its goal. Soviets withdrew. USSR collapsed years later. But after the war, fighters were abandoned. Afghanistan collapsed into chaos. Out of this chaos emerged Al-Qaeda. September 11th, 2001. Al-Qaeda architect, World Trade Center, Pentagon. Nearly 3,000 Americans died. This single event reshaped us foreign policy, surveillance laws, global security, 2 decades of war. ISIS, the monster of power vacuums. Iraq War 2003. The USA invaded Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein. But after victory, Iraqi army was dissolved. Government collapsed. Sectarian violence exploded. Power vacuum equals sign extremism. Former soldiers, prisoners, and extremists united. They found purpose in chaos. Thus emerged ISIS. Why ISIS was different? Controlled territory, ran governments, used social media propaganda, declared a caliphate. ISIS shocked the world with its beheadings, terror attacks in Europe, global recruitment. ISIS was not born in a vacuum. It was born in post-war disorder. Taliban resurgence, the war that never ended. 2001 Taliban removed. After 9/11 Fez, USA invaded Afghanistan. Taliban government collapsed quickly, but victory was incomplete. Why the Taliban returned? Cultural discount, modern conflicts and global impact. 8.1 Ukraine war, global food crisis, energy prices, NATO expansion. 8 Middle East conflicts, oil politics, refugees, terrorism cycles. 8.3 Indo-Pacific tensions, Taiwan, South China Sea, future world war risk. 8.1 The Ukraine war, a regional conflict with global consequences. Background: why Ukraine matters. Ukraine's it's at the crossroads of Europe and Russia. Historically, it has been a breadbasket for Europe, a buffer zone between NATO and Russia, a cultural and strategic link in Eastern Europe. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, it wasn't just an attack on one country. It was a challenge to the post-World War to global order, global food crisis. Ukraine, the world's breadbasket. Before the war, Ukraine was one of the world's largest exporters of wheat, corn, sunflower oil. Many countries in Africa, Middle East, South Asia depend heavily on Ukrainian grain. How are disrupted food supply? Ports like Odessa were blocked. Farms became battlefields. Grain silos were destroyed. Shipping insurance costs exploded. Global impact. Food prices surged worldwide. Poor countries faced shortages. Risk of famine increased. Political unrest grew in vulnerable regions. Key point: a war in Eastern Europe directly increased hunger thousands of miles away. Energy prices and global inflation. Europe's dependence on Russian energy. Before the war, Russia supplied major gas and oil to Europe. Energy was relatively cheap. After sanctions, gas prices spiked. Electricity costs doubled or tripled. Factory shut down. Inflation surged. Impact on the United States. Even though the US produces energy, global oil prices rose. Fuel costs increased. Inflation hit American households. Interest rates increased. War acted like a hidden global tax. NATO expansion and new Cold War. Why NATO expanded? Countries near Russia felt threatened. Finland, Sweden, they chose NATO membership for protection. Russia's perspective, from Moscow's view, NATO expansion looks like encirclement. Ukraine joining NATO was seen as unacceptable. Result: NATO is stronger and larger. Russia is more isolated. A new Cold War is underway. The Ukraine war redrew Europe's security map. 8 Middle East conflicts. The region that never stops burning. The Middle East is not one war, it is many overlapping conflicts. Oil politics and global power. Why the Middle East matters. Holds a major share of global oil reserves. Controls critical shipping routes. Energy prices affect every economy. Wars and oil prices. Whenever conflict erupts, oil prices spike instantly. Inflation rises globally. Markets panic. USA's role. Protects soil shipping lanes. Maintains military bases. Balances alliances with Israel, Gulf states. Energy security = national security. Refugee crisis. Scale of displacement. Wars in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Gaza have displaced tens of millions. Global effects. Refugees move into Europe. Strain on social systems. Rise of nationalism. Political backlash. Long-term damage. Children growing up in refugee camps face lost education, trauma, radicalization risks. Refugees are not just a humanitarian issue, they reshape politics. Terrorism cycles. How terrorism grows. War destroys institutions. Power vacuums form. Extremist groups emerge. Examples: Al-Qaeda after Soviet-Afghan War, ISIS after Iraq War, the endless cycle, war instability, extremism, more war, USA's challenge, fighting terrorism abroad, preventing attacks at home, avoiding endless wars. Military victories don't always bring peace. 8.3 Indo-Pacific tensions, the most dangerous region on Earth today. The Indo-Pacific is where future global power will be decided. Taiwan, the most explosive flashpoint. Why Taiwan matters. Produces advanced semiconductors. Critical for global technology. Strategic location near China. China's position. Claims Taiwan as its territory. Sees reunification as inevitable. USA's position. Supports Taiwan's self-defense. Ambiguous military commitment. Protects freedom of navigation. Risk scenario. A war over Taiwan would collapse global tech. Future of war. 9.1 AI wars. Autonomous weapons. Algorithmic killing. 9.0 climate wars. Water scarcity. Food wars. Climate refugees. 9.3 Will war ever end? History suggests no. But scale and nature will change. 9.1 AI wars. Autonomous weapons and algorithmic killing. The end of human decision-making? For most of history, war required a human decision. A general gave the order. A soldier pulled the trigger. A pilot dropped the bomb. That chain is breaking. Artificial intelligence is now capable of identifying targets, selecting targets, engaging targets without direct human input. This is known as autonomous warfare. Autonomous weapons, what are they? Autonomous weapons are systems that sense their environment, analyze data, decide when and how to attack, execute lethal force independently. Examples already exist. AI-powered drones, automated missile defense systems, loitering munitions, kamikaze drones. Some of these systems are already deployed by United States, China, Russia, Israel, Turkey. The future is not hypothetical. It is already here. Algorithmic killing. In future wars, killing may not be emotional, personal, or moral. It may be mathematical. AI systems evaluate heat signatures, movement patterns, facial recognition, phone metadata, online behavior. From this data, an algorithm determines this person is a threat. No courtroom, no trial, no hesitation, just execution by code. Moral and strategic dangers. 1. No accountability. If an AI kills civilians, who is responsible? The programmer, the commander, the government. 2. Speed of war. AI reacts faster than humans. That means wars could escalate in seconds. Nuclear retaliation could be triggered automatically. 3. Dehumanization. When killing becomes automated, war becomes easier to start. Casualties become statistics. Moral restraint disappears. USA and AI warfare. The United States invests billions in autonomous drones, AI battlefield analytics, decision support systems. Officially, the US claims humans will always remain in the loop. But history shows efficiency replaces ethics. Speed replaces caution. Once one nation deploys lethal AI fully, others must follow. This is the I arms race. 9 point to climate wars. Water scarcity, food wars, and climate refugees. Climate change is a weapon multiplier. Climate change does not directly cause war. It amplifies existing tensions. When resources disappear, cooperation collapses, borders harden, violence rises. The future battlefield will often be a drought zone. Water scarcity, the new oil. Water will be more valuable than oil. Major risk zones include Middle East, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Western United States, rivers crossing borders like the Nile, Indus, Tigris, Euphrates are becoming geopolitical flashpoints. A nation upstream can cut water supply, collapse agriculture, force migration. Water wars will not always look like wars. They will look like slow strangulation. Food wars, climate change disrupts crop cycles, rainfall patterns, soil fertility. Result: food shortages, price spikes, political instability. History proves this pattern. French Revolution, bread shortages. Arab Spring, food inflation. Syrian war, prolonged drought. When people cannot eat, governments fall. Climate refugees. By mid-century, hundreds of millions may be displaced, not by war but by unlivable land. These migrations will overwhelm borders, trigger nationalist backlash, fuel ethnic conflict. Future wars may start not with bombs but with boats, caravans, and desperate families. USA and climate conflict. The US military already treats climate change as a national security threat. Why? Naval bases flooding, border pressure from climate migration, overseas instability requiring intervention. America may not fight climate wars by choice but by necessity. 9.3 Will war ever end? What history tells us, every generation believes, this war will be the last. History disagrees. War has existed since. Tribes competed for land. Kingdoms sought power. States defended ideology. War shapes the world you live in, the money you earn, the freedoms you have, the future your children inherit. The question is not will wars happen? The real question is, are we prepared for the world they create?